First of all, my name is Stephanie Kaler. I'm the Executive Director of the Downtown Novato Business Association. So I appreciate all of you coming, and I appreciate all my partners who helped get the word out about this. I actually don't have much to say. I'll let it sort of go over to Dave Jeffries, who is sort of leading the charge on this conversation. So if you have any questions for me, I'll be here the whole time, and I'll be here after. And just a final note, to make sure everybody does sign in over by where Peter is at the table, we have a presentation that we can email out to everybody afterwards, so you can have the resources.
Well, good morning, everybody. This is a great turnout. Thank you for being here. My name is Dave Jeffries. Just to clarify who I am and who I'm not, let me start with who I'm not. I do not work for PG&E. I'm not here to represent PG&E. This is the fifth time I've done this presentation, and one of them apparently I wasn't clear enough and people started reaching for some rotten tomatoes. So I figured I better clarify my role. Novato for me is home. I spent 31 years with the police department, so I've been in this community for over 3 decades working. Since my retirement, I work with several local agencies on emergency management planning, and Novato and City of Sonoma and some others are among my clients. So we worked on this presentation as part of our response to the public safety power shutoff. And we felt, even though we're still working on our response, that there was information that needed to come out. And so we'll be walking that through with you today. And I'd also like to introduce Chief Bill Tyler, who's going to lead off the presentation this morning. Yes, the right one.
Good morning. How is everybody? Good morning. Good. Yes, my name is Bill Tyler. I'm the fire chief. Been with the Novato Fire District for over 23 years. And I live in this community as well. You might have seen me around town with my family. Our kids attend school here. We shop here. We live here. Our whole lives are here. And so, today's information is very, very important. Initially, we started off talking to different stakeholders at a very high level, trying to let them know that we've been notified by PG&E that they're going to escalate potential power shutoffs and what that might mean, what kind of impacts we might all have. And behind the scenes, the fire district has been working very closely with the city and the other government agencies, the water district, the sanitary district, the schools, the hospitals, all of the critical infrastructure to make sure that we're prepared in case of the power outages, which we anticipate happening later this summer, certainly. And so part of that stakeholder meeting was to reach out to the business community, and we gave a presentation and we said we're available to do a follow-up. And so that's basically what this was today, and then it was expanded, and also members of the public were invited. So just so I can understand who the audience is fully here, if you are a business owner in Novato, can you raise your hand so we can see the breakout here? Okay, very good. And then members of the public is, I'm assuming, is there, yep, okay, good. All right, great. Thank you. So, let's see here. So basically, I'm just going to take you through the first part of the presentation. We're going to, we originally were going to do a welcome, just identify those businesses, but there's so many of you mixed with the public, we're going to just move on through that. With introductions, we were going to cover an understanding of what this power safety shutoff is, the effects that we think it's going to be, the assessment of what will happen and where the areas we think this will happen, along with mitigations, preparedness, and then next steps. So those are the things we're going to cover today. Okay, so with regards to the power shutoff plan, just to give you a quick history on how that went, the criteria for the implementation, the different tiers or areas where we expect this to happen. We're going to talk about notifications, what an outage period might look like, and then the complications of what that is. So let's just talk about why we're really here. So, given the continued and growing threat of the extreme fire weather that we've had from 2017 and 2018, PG&E has taken additional steps on wildfire preparedness. They're doing this as a company-wide. This is being done across the state, so it's not just PG&E in Northern California. It's also the utility companies in the Central California and down Southern California, Edison. The idea for doing these shutoffs started in San Diego County, where they have a lot more fires down in Southern California than we've had in the past, and it worked effectively down there, and so they're bringing that same concept up here. PG&E is rolling out a number of community wildfire preparedness programs. The information is available through the CPUC and also through PG&E's websites. And PG&E will be doing their own public seminars for Marin County on July 30th, and that's going to occur down in San Rafael at the Embassy Suites. So again, as Dave mentioned to you earlier, we are not PG&E. They are a publicly traded for-profit company, and that is separate from the fire district and all of the other special districts in the city that help respond and help take care of you. So basically what's happening is that they're working on doing shutoffs. And turn this page here. There's no single factor for the shutoff. They've told us that they're going to take a look at red flag conditions, which is a red flag is something that's issued by the National Weather Service when fire danger is high. It's not something that's issued through the fire departments ourselves. We have our own separate criteria that we use, but it is an indicator for us that you've got very low humidities, generally high temperatures. So low humidities are below 20%. They're looking at high winds, so if you've got 25 mile per hour sustained winds with gusts to 45, that is one of their indicators. They're looking at the moisture content of the fuel, so that means the dry grasses and brush. They look at things called burn index and spread components to determine if a fire starts, what will the intensity be, how likely will it be to spread, and how difficult will it be to control. So in addition to that, they're using what's called ground truth. So they have people in the field that are checking on the conditions. They have a lot of weather stations that they're using, and they're going to try and bring all of that together to make a decision on where they're going to shut off power.
All PG&E.
This is all PG&E's decision. So let's talk about the areas where they intend to do shutoffs. So PG&E has divided up all of California and Northern California, which is their territory, into 3 tiers. Tier 3, which is in the red up on the screen that you see, is the highest level of risk. And what that means is that that's where they have infrastructure that they both need to protect, and also that they're concerned could cause a fire in those areas. So it's where they feel they've got high fire danger, along with where their infrastructure and equipment is located. So, I'm sorry?
What does that mean?
The question is, what does that mean? So,
High fire, I mean, it's based on their determination. So what is that Marin County right there?
yeah, behind me is a picture of Marin County, and this is actually Novato. So if you see the kind of the charcoal color area, that's the city limits of Novato. That is what is in a tier 1 area, which is the lowest area that they're identifying. The kind of the gold is the tier 2, and then the highest is the tier 3. So again, I'm not with PG&E, but my understanding is how they determine these areas is they worked with CAL FIRE. They looked at other maps that were out there to talk about fire hazard severity zones, and then they know where their infrastructure is. And they've made this determination that that is their highest threat level. That those are the areas where they're most likely to turn off power if they hit the criteria to do so.
This is all allowed within the laws of this country for them to, a utility company to say, hey, I'm going to shut off the power and put your people in danger when the welfare, safety and welfare of the
Could we
people.
have given a presentation of that?
So the question was, is this within the confines of the law, et cetera? So I believe it is, because they've already done this across California. And again, it's not a judgment call that the government agencies are making. They are under a court order through the CPUC to take certain precautions. And this is their response to their preparedness levels. So let's just get through. We'll have plenty of time for questions to go. So we'll go ahead and get through the rest of this. So this map itself is also available online at the CPUC. And Dave, can you? So as you can see here, all of California is mapped in this way. And it goes all the way down to Southern California. So what I'm going to do now is just, I'm just going to zoom in here on our area. I'm going to let this load. But this is available to anyone. After the meeting, they can go to the CPUC website and you can, just query fire maps and you'll be able to drill down and take a look at specific areas. What this intends to do through GIS, through the mapping, is to be able to drill down and see various streets. So here's Marin County here, and this will continue to load with the underlying maps. This is Marin County here. And then we're going to zoom in a little bit further. So this is Marin County a little bit closer. So one of the takeaways here is that this is affecting all of California. If you take a look at the Tier 3 and the Tier 2 areas, it's basically over half of all of their customers across the state that potentially could be impacted. Initially, when we saw these maps, we were very, very concerned because the thought of, a Tier 2 turnoff, Tier 2 and Tier 3 in Marin County would be a huge, not only a huge area, but affect a lot of people. And we'll talk a little bit about the time period that we think that the power will be out. Fortunately, we have had now at least one activation of the PSPS in California, and that was up near Oroville and Chico. They actually had two separate activations that affected around 30,000 people. And the takeaway lesson for that was, for us anyway, was that it seems that this is going to be more surgical than it is kind of a cleaver. So if you hear that the power shutoff is going to occur, the impression that I get is that it's not going to be the entire county, both Tier 2 and Tier 3. They're going to let us know ahead of time the particular areas, and they've said that they will share specific maps with us of the precise areas where the shutoffs will be. And that is what occurred up in Chico-Oroville area. So that was very good news for us. But nonetheless, we still feel that we all need to be prepared because we don't know what areas they're actually going to specifically select. And also, we'll go into a little more detail later, it's not just a Tier 3 or a Tier 2 area. If the power runs through a Tier 1 area that serves those Tier 2 and Tier 3 that they tend to shut off, they will also shut off power in the Tier 1 area. And so that's why those specific maps will be very, very important to the emergency services with as much notice as possible before the event occurs. So let me just drill down a little bit further here. So what I can do is I can turn off, and what you can do when you go into these maps is you can turn off the Tier 2 and Tier 3, and you can see basically the city limits. And I'll turn these, and you can also drill down to see your particular street where you live. And what we've done with our employees at Novato Fire is we've shared these maps with them for all of California, and they've been able to look and see where they live, because as a business or as a government agency, we rely on our employees to come in and actually perform the work. And so we want to make sure that they are very prepared at home for their families, their kids, their loved ones, their pets, so that they can be prepared. So in the event of a power outage, they will still be able to come into work, take care of their preparations and come in. All right, so if I was to turn off the Zone 1, you will be able to see the underlying map.
That's their tree mortalities on the.
I'm sorry?
That's their tree mortalities on the.
Okay.
Tree mortality?
Oh, I see.
Different stuff.
There we go. So this is the base map that they're using basically. So you can then go in and turn on the incorporated cities footprint. You can turn on the Tier 2. And then you can also turn on the Tier 3. And basically that's down in Santa Fe. So let's pull it up to Novato here. So this is just a tool that you can use, and you can go in and see exactly where you live. Okay. So we got to go back into.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave to talk about the notifications for you, and we're going to walk through the rest of the things, and then we'll have plenty of time to ask and answer as many questions as possible. Okay, Dave?
So this is not, I'm on mic this time. I usually don't have anything but an outside voice, so I don't usually need a microphone. This is not a new program, but the reason you're seeing an emphasis on it this year is from what you saw on the map. Last year, they only worried about the Tier 3 zones. And as you look at that statewide map, there were a number of areas, but not immense. This year, they've added the Tier 2 areas to their planning. So the area exposed to potential de-energizing has grown incredibly since last year because of the addition of Tier 2. And as Bill mentioned, the other thing they're doing this year is in the past, it was only looking at distribution lines, the more local lines. But after the campfire last year, which was started by a transmission line, they're now looking at transmission lines as well. And so I'll talk about it a little more, but the important thing is if our pipeline into Novato comes through an area that's being de-energized, those transmission lines will be de-energized as well. And just like when you turn off the spigot to your garden hose, everything down that hose is dry after that. So that again, that's why there's an emphasis, the addition of Tier 2 and the addition of transmission lines. So what PG&E is saying is they're going to try to get the first notification out 48 hours in advance, saying based on our weather forecasting, we believe in 48 hours we're going to have to de-energize these areas. Now, from what we're seeing from the first time, back in early June, they didn't really make 48 hours. It's closer to 24. At 24 hours, we're expecting to get a second notification saying, okay, the weather picture is a little clearer, so the areas that are going to be impacted may have changed a little bit, but here's what we see coming. And then an hour or so before they do shut off, there should be another notification, and that should be what's really going to go on. It's really probably the best they can do, because if you guys watch the news every night, the weather forecasters are always kind of right. So as the data keeps changing, they're going to adjust to that. There'll be additional notifications coming out during the outages and then upon restoration. They are encouraging customers, if you haven't received mail on this, to get on the PG&E website and update your customer information to give them more contact information so they can call you, text you, email you. Obviously, they'll be doing a lot of the media stuff too, websites, social media, local news. They'll also be reaching out to their public safety partners to let us know what's coming, and as Bill mentioned, provide us some access to mapping so that we have a better idea of what's going to be affected. Right now, we don't have maps that we can do any planning on, and from what we're seeing from the June event, the maps that came out there are very specific to the weather patterns they're seeing at that point. So we're hoping to have a day or two's notice about what areas are going to be impacted ourselves. That's the PG&E notification piece. For us locally, we want to make sure you're hearing from your local public safety folks what our response is and what you need to know from us. So we're looking at using things like Alert Marin, and there's a slide on that later with information on how to sign up for that. Alert Marin is run by the Marin County Office of Emergency Services. The city and the fire district both have access to that. It's sometimes referred to as a reverse 911 system. So we can draw a boundary in there on a map or draw a point and say everything within 1,500 yards, whatever we need to do, and send messages to everybody that's subscribed in that area. If you don't do anything, if you have a typical home phone, that would be the number that was called, that we have subscriber information. But we really encourage people to log in to Alert Marin, sign up, provide cell phone numbers, email, etc. That way, whether you're home or not, if there's something affecting your neighborhood, you'll get the alert. It's free, and again, it's only focused on when we have an emergent issue that we need to reach out quickly. Those systems do 700-800 phone calls a minute. It's really fast and puts a lot of information out. Nixle is another free service. They're actually now owned by the same company. Nixle, if you haven't seen it, you'll get alerts as well. You'll get press releases, a variety of other things. You can sign up to follow different agencies on there. It's all free to you folks. And there's a link in one of the slides later about how to get to that. And it's another mechanism for us to be able to reach out to you. You can control what level of messaging you're getting and which agencies you choose to follow. Certainly, we're looking at media releases too, potentially the mobile signboards, using social media itself, and working through some of our local partners as well. We are meeting with the water district, the sanitary district, the school district, the Humane Society here in town, and they have avenues of reaching out too. So we're working side by side with them so that we can get messaging out. And we're going to follow along with PG&E's plan. As soon as we know about it, we'll try to get something out pretty quickly on how we're going to respond here locally. Follow it up when there's another message, again, just before the shutoff, some updates during the shutoff, and again upon restoration. The difference you'll see between PG&E and ours is the local messaging will probably provide some local information for you. So we're talking about being able to set up a resource site. So during hot weather, occasionally we've had to open up a cooling site where people can go during the day, where it's air conditioned, just get out of the heat if you don't have AC at home. We're looking at taking that same idea and adding power strips and power cords. And so if your neighborhood's affected by the power shutoff, a place you can go during the day and plug in and recharge your batteries and all that sort of stuff. So that's information that PG&E probably wouldn't be putting out because it would be more regional, but we would be sharing that information that this location will be open between these hours. And there may be other local things, like talking to the water district and the sanitary district. We may be encouraging some restricted use of resources if it's a wide scale outage, because the same electricity we use for everything else, your local government partners are using for their purposes too. So we'll be providing that sort of information to you. So Bill mentioned why we're doing this. He talked about the tiers, the scope of this. Another piece of this formula is what is the outage period? How long will this be out? And it's really a two-step process. Based on the weather event, PG&E is going to decide when to de-energize part of their system. And then as the weather changes and gets to a point where it's improved enough that they're comfortable, then they'll stop the weather-related outage. But it's not over yet. But that's the first part of the time. How long does it have to be turned off because of weather conditions? Once the weather conditions have passed, then they're going to inspect every mile of wire they have out there in the affected area. And once they've gone through that process, then, and any repairs have been made, then they'll turn the electricity back on. So we're being told that window of time could be 2, 3, 4 days, in addition to the time it's out because of the weather. That's what makes this different than the 2, 3, 4 hour outages we're used to around here occasionally. Sir?
This business of, you mentioned sewer and water, if that gets shut down within a day or 2 or 3, there'll be no water, and you probably have a sewage treatment plant overflowing everywhere.
So without getting into the details of everybody's operations, we are meeting with them. Some of our facilities have generator backup that will support the whole facility. In other cases, for pump stations and all, it's the ability to put generators out there and manipulate that so that we keep the water flowing and we keep the sanitary district stations pumping as well. That's the planning we're doing in the background. We saw that one coming.
Do you have any idea how much power? The water district is probably the biggest electric power user in the county.
Well, I'll say this is we're meeting with the water district and we're meeting with the sanitary district, and they're telling us that they've looked at this and they've got a plan in place and they recognize what they have to do. Like I said, I'm not an electrician by trade. I can't tell you the formulas, but that's what we're getting from them, and we are working side by side with them to make sure that those issues don't occur. It's going to be a hassle compared to daily operations, but they think they've got that handled.
For fire district, not having water could be a lot more than a hassle.
Absolutely, but in terms of the hassles, they're going to have to move generators to pumping stations, and a lot of the town is fed through gravity, so they got to get the water up to the tank so it can come back down through gravity. But in working with them, like I said, they're working on a plan side by side with us to make sure that's not an issue for us. And remember, the whole idea of this plan is to make sure that we don't have electrically caused fires. So hopefully there's less danger of fire. Not that electricity's been the only cause of fires around here. So we're also trying to build into our plan what happens if we're doing this and we do have some other emergency, and how do we reach out to the community. But the issue of water and sanitary has been, we've had more than couple of meetings with them on that issue alone. Sir?
I'm very unclear about this map system. Because, as you mentioned, it's 3 different tiers, and the 3rd tier is the least likely to be...
Tier 1.
Tier 1, I'm sorry. Well, if the power supply lines to Tier 1 are going through Tier 2, and it's going to be shut off, that makes the Tier 1 at par with Tier 2.
Exactly. That's part of why you're seeing the outreach this year is they've added Tier 2 and they've added the transmission lines. So the Tier 2 and Tier 3 map you saw is something that the California Public Utilities Commission has on their website. That's what they're basing their decisions on de-energizing around. But again, this year they've added transmission lines. So if they pass through an area that's being de-energized, that's exactly the concern that's causing the outreach this year.
So it's should be actually shown as Tier 1.
Well, no. So the Tier 2 and Tier 3 are the neighborhoods, the areas of the state they're looking at, and when the weather conditions exist in those areas, they'll make the decisions about shutoffs. They're really not looking at the weather conditions in Tier 1 areas. But if a transmission line passes through an area they're de-energizing, yes, there may be an impact on Tier 1. So our point is, if you look at the map and go, I live in a Tier 1 area, or my business is in a Tier 1 area, that's great. However, if we run into this transmission line issue, we could see wider spread outages. And that, again, that's why you're seeing the outreach this year.
Can you guys better identify these supply lines to Novato? And,
well, the transmission lines are pretty obvious. You see them driving by. They're the high towers. Now, in terms of what's going to happen, if somebody can tell me what the weather's going to be like in 3 or 4 weeks with humidity, winds, and all that, then we could probably do some predictions. That's the challenge. It's based on the weather. And as we know, that's a dynamic that's hard to predict well in advance. Sir?
Could you give us a little perspective on what the success of what happened in San Diego was for shutting down, and on the other side, how does a family live for 5 days without power at their home with a sudden introduction of this upon us without any training? Nobody's got generators. Nobody knows how to survive. You know, this is
Well,
rural America.
Let me save the second part for a little later in the presentation. With San Diego, they've been doing this longer. They've been more assertive about it down there, so they've had a chance to work through some of these things. So for PG&E, last year was the first year we really heard about them with the Tier 3 areas, and this year it's an incredible ramp up for Tier 2 and transmission. So it's really, for a lot of our areas, the first time we've had to deal with this up here. But mostly with San Diego, they've had repetition to go through this, and no doubt we're going to learn as we go along.
And so it's definitely not a question that it did succeed down there, or are we just taking it for granted from what they...
Well, and I would say, my understanding is it succeeded down there. I'm no expert on San Diego, but from the June 6th event, or the week of June 6th, what PG&E's reported back already is when they did their inspections, they found 5 areas of damage to their system that could have caused fires and didn't because it was de-energized. So that's their point, is, you know, they're between a rock and a hard place. If we leave the electricity on, and there's damage to the system, we've all seen the last couple of years what the potential is. And again, the campfire especially, you know, it was about over 80 fatalities up there. I was up there for 6 days working on that event up there, and the damage up there caused by a transmission line and the high level fatalities is, I think, part of what drove this to be a much more expansive program this year. But again, they're saying, hey, here's 5 things that could have started a fire and didn't because we de-energized. Now, if they de-energize, there's a lot of impacts. That's why you're all here today, because there's going to be impacts on all of us. And again, for them, it's, if we leave the juice on, this could happen. If we turn the juice off, this can happen.
So it's confirmed.
And I would say the CPUC has approved PG&E's plan. Great, answers a question you have earlier.
Excuse me, it's gonna happen, okay? So we can cry all we want, but...
Right, okay. So for the outage period, the time we're talking about is the weather-based plus the time it takes them to inspect their lines. That's the time period. Now, the challenge for that restoration period is if it's 5 city blocks, they can check that in no time. But we've also been told in some cases under the right weather conditions, an entire county may be de-energized. So how long does it take to check all the lines in a county? Which is why that second period, we don't know until we get there, okay? And what we're talking about here is, again, the distribution lines that feed our homes and businesses was involved last year. But these transmission lines is a new piece to this, and those are those high towers, the high voltage lines that were not included last year and are now. And this gets to the point I was making about if your power to your neighborhood does not pass through a de-energized area, you're good. But if it does, and it's not that they're going to shut off all of Tier 2 and all of Tier 3. The early mapping we've seen from these other events is they're being fairly surgical about drawing the map of what they're going to de-energize based on the weather in those locations. But if it does happen to intersect with transmission lines, if the juice is not running through that zone and that's what's coming to you, we're going to have downstream effects. So that's the understanding part. We wanted to start with making sure you had an idea of what was coming, what the dynamics of it are. So we talked about why they're doing it, the scope of it in terms of Tier 2, Tier 3, the complications of passing through with the transmission lines, and duration. So let's talk about a little bit about assessment, and this is a key piece that we wanted to share, especially for the business community, but for homeowners as well. Your homework is to go back and walk through your business or your home and understand what this would mean. If there's no lighting, some places you're probably okay. You can get by during the day by pulling the blinds open on the windows. Other places may be a bigger issue. Air conditioning, your computer systems, your point of sale devices. Right? Anybody here use iPad type devices for point of sale? Okay, and you might go, well, I can use a battery and recharge that point of sale device. But if it's talking to your Wi-Fi router, and your Wi-Fi router doesn't have electricity, so we want to really encourage you to walk back through your system to understand what's connected to what. Because there may be parts of this you can easily mitigate, but part of your system may not be. So think about it in terms of your data backups and all. If you have a routine system for backing up data, if you hear that one of these power shutoffs is coming, I would probably do a manual backup shortly before the power goes out. Even if it's just in the area, not affecting my location, just in case. Last year there were a couple instances where PG&E said, we're going to de-energize this area, and they did, and suddenly this community over here had their power turned off as well. And they didn't see that one coming. So, to do a manual backup makes a lot of sense, good insurance. Telephones. Show of hands, how many of us have rotary dial phones anymore? A couple. You're probably okay.
I have one.
You're probably okay. I was helping with an evacuation drill in Mill Valley a few years ago, and the reverse 911 call went out to folks and said, press 1 if you received the message, and we got feedback. I wasn't sure how to press 1 on my rotary dial phone. But old school, that's probably okay. But for the rest of us, with our wireless handsets at home and electronic bases and voice over IP and all these sorts of things that we have, that could be a challenge for us as well. Refrigeration. Now at home for 2 or 3 days, if you're just very careful about opening the door, you can keep some cold in there for a while. But if your business requires refrigeration, what is that going to mean for you? Alarm systems, ring doorbells, all those security things you have that rely on electricity. Gas stations. There may be some, but I haven't heard of any gas stations running on generators at this point. ATMs, maybe battery backup that might help for a few hours, but if the bank doesn't have a generator, I'm guessing by day 2 or day 3, they're going to have issues as well. So spend some time, walk back through again your home, your business, your operations, and understand what that's going to mean to you. For the community, traffic lights, street lights. The cell providers don't like talking about their systems very much, but the general understanding we have is a number of them have battery backups, which is fine for the usual power outages. But when we're talking day 2, day 3, day 4, you can see a degradation in cell phone access. And what else do we use cell phones for besides voice? Data. Okay, so potential impacts there. So this is where you need, because you're all in unique situations. Your businesses operate different, your homes are set up different, but you need to go back and take an assessment of what this is going to mean in your operations so that you can understand, before we move on to the next slide here, and talk about some things that you may be able to do to help mitigate this. Anybody think of any other things that might be an issue for us?
Just the stuff you're talking about, you said that they've done this down in San Diego. They must have gone through every one of these problems. And it would seem like if somebody from there, or a few people from there, could come up here and tell us what was bad, how they solved it, that would be, we're just kind of guessing here how bad it might get, whether or not to shut down.
Well, and again, there's an expansion of the program this year, but some of this there are not good answers to. There just aren't good answers to it. But we want to walk through this with you and help you try to mitigate what you can. And right behind you, there was a question.
Yeah, so I'm a solar and electrical contractor, and just wanted to let everybody know that.
You're one slide early here.
Dave, let's get through the presentation.
Okay. So the next part, and there will be time at the end for questions. What we want you to do is once you understand what the impacts are to you, now you can start thinking about mitigation. And so what we mean by mitigation is things are going to minimize or prevent the impact to you. For the homeowners, how many of you have water tanks that are strapped to the house, metal straps to hold it in place? That's a mitigation technique, so that in an earthquake it doesn't keel over. Okay? So for this, I don't have a lot of great answers, but for some things, and things that we're especially worried about, is folks that rely on medical equipment that needs electricity or medications that have to stay refrigerated. So there may be pieces of this that you're able to handle without powering your whole house or your whole business. Generators are one option. Now, if you're going to power a whole house or a whole business on a generator, you need someone who understands those to do the math for you on how big and what the scope is. And also, please do not try connecting a generator to your house or business without a qualified electrician. Those transfer switches, even a couple electricians I talked to said, yeah, those are a challenge. And so that's not a home hobby assignment. You can cause a lot of trouble with those. Batteries of different sizes may help for some sorts of things. You can see a couple examples here. In the lower left corner, the Yeti batteries down there is one I take with me when I'm out of town in the woods or stuff that provides a pretty good source of electricity for a lot of things, but it's not going to supply the house. The solar panels to recharge some of these things. Whenever I'm out teaching or on the road, I've always got 2 or 3 little external batteries for my iPhone, my iPad, things like that. So some of those devices are easier, the house is harder. Getting in there are other alternative sources of energy. Some businesses are looking at this. Where'd you go? Just now, perfect timing. But if you were looking at solar, wind, water turbines, all those kinds of things, this may be one more reason to take a look at that. But there are other reasons for doing those things. There's obviously a return on investment issue there because those can be pricey as well. Sir?
I don't do solar, but I got a friend who does it.
We're not selling here today.
So it's information. So I asked him if the power goes out and you have solar, is that going to power your house? He said, no, you have to have a battery.
Well, so a solar system that feeds batteries and the batteries feed your house is the solution that would work there. If it's just solar, it's just feeding you contemporaneous while the sun's on the solar panels. But that's part of the system, is that battery backup. And then lastly, the other thing that you might do to mitigate this is look at your operations. What can you do to change your operations? I did this presentation in Mill Valley, and one of the business owners they interviewed talked about going back to manual credit card swipers as a mitigation method, so they don't have to rely on point-of-sale devices. We talked with a skilled nursing facility that's part of a chain. They were actually talking with their corporate offices that if they were in this position, would they be able to move clients to other facilities that they own that are in unaffected areas? Okay, so there's those kind of opportunities here. But that may be it, is how can you adjust your operations? If you rely on data-based stuff that's in the cloud that you may not reach, you may want to put some of that data on a thumb drive or a local drive that you can still access from a laptop if that's important to you. Those sorts of things. But walk through and look at what you can do. Trying to power your whole facility might be a challenge, but look at the pieces you can do. Like I said, we don't have great answers on this one. The last step of this is you understand what's coming. you've walked through and assessed what this may mean to you, your business, and your home. You try to look for some things that might mitigate part of this, but we encourage you to have a plan. Now, for a home, it might be very simple, some notes on a piece of paper. I'll walk through what we're doing here, a little more extensive than a single sheet of paper, but encourage you to develop a plan so that when you get that first notice, you don't have to, in a panic mode, go, oh no, what do I do? If you spend some time on that today, when that notice comes out, you'll be a lot more confident, a lot more comfortable dealing with it because you have a plan in place. Test that plan. If you're relying on equipment, test that. We're going through that process now. We're looking at doing generator tests. And when I still worked here, we ran the police department for 24 hours straight on our generator. That was a great test to make sure that all the connections were right and we could support dispatch and everything else we were doing off that generator. Great confidence builder. Train your staff. What are your expectations for them? That day is going to be different. So if you're looking at changing your operations, I would be briefing my staff on that ahead of time rather than just-in-time training while the power is going out. Give them time to absorb that. Coordinate with your partners and vendors. I'll give you a couple of suggestions again. Sign up for some of our notification stuff. So we took 2 swipes at this. The first thing we did very quickly is we created an action plan. What are those things we want to accomplish? And we're sharing this with you because it may cause you to have some ideas here. So for the city and the fire district who work together on our emergency management program, this is what we went through. The same action plan is being used in Southern Marin now and a few other places. First off for us was public education. So we're working on a public education plan. These presentations are part of that, but you'll start seeing stuff in the media to try to get people aware and get them started on the path to being resilient. And then we'll conduct that campaign. At the same time, we're developing press releases for the event so that when we get notified, by the same token, we're out there, oh no, what do we say now? We know pretty much what the first couple of press releases should say. The only thing we don't know is the date, the time, and the neighborhood. So we're writing those things now so that we're much more nimble when the time comes. Our staff education. We have a presentation that will be going out to city and fire district staff, focusing on 2 issues. One, making sure that their homes and their families are prepared, just like we're suggesting you do, so that during that emergency, our city and district staff can be available to come in and not be worried about their homes and their families. Same speech we have about earthquakes. Make sure that you got your home prepared so that you can come into work in that emergency. And then conduct that staff education plan. I mentioned resource sites. So we've developed a plan about resource sites. And we've got 1 site already identified. We're working on a 2nd site, what the criteria would be for more sites if need be. But we've got this written down so that if we decided we need to open up a resource site, we're not winging it. We know what we're looking for. And we'll probably be acquiring more power strips and cables along the way to help support that. We're developing a series of plans on different issues so that if we need them, we can go to them. Safety and security from the police department, fire and EMS plan, public warning and alternatives. So one of our concerns on public warning is this. I mentioned Alert Marin and Nixle and all that. Pre-event, that stuff's solid. We use it. We know how it works. But while the event's going on, what did we just talk about? You may have email issues, you may have home phone issues, you may have cell phone issues. So this one's still being worked on, but it's what are the alternatives that we have? Whether it's using public address systems, the wireless emergency alerting system, the EAS emergency alerting system, putting signboards out, knocking on doors, whatever the case may be. But we want a list of options in here for doing public warning in the event we have an emergency during this. But we want to work on it now and not in the heat of the moment. Access and functional needs, AFN. How are we going to address this population? So we know there are facilities out there that have requirements to do planning, and we're certainly encouraging them to do that. But what about folks that live at home that have trouble evacuating on their own, or again, have durable medical equipment that needs to be powered and all that? So we're working into the plan how we're going to work with Health and Human Services and others to deal with that, or For folks that English is their second language, part of the plan is making sure a lot of our releases are also out in other languages to address those issues as well. But we're working on that now and not waiting for the event. Transportation issues, what's our access to move people and things around? Again, there'll be a plan there for that. Then for our own preparedness, and hopefully some of this strikes a chord with you, we are testing our generators. We're trying to do load testing on them. That's different than at once every 3 months you turn it on for 5 minutes and turn it off again. Is it really going to sustain our operation? Checking with our fuel vendors. Day in and day out, these fuel vendors do a good job of delivering, but what when all their customers call at once and say, we need fuel on Wednesday? What's that going to do if there's a limited number of vendors? So we're following up on alternatives and working with them on priorities. Or are we sure our gas pumps are tied to the generator so we know they'll still work? Going through and validating those sorts of things. We're identifying sources of generators should we need them. We're trying to update and prepare our facilities with water and food if we go into extended operations, and then drafting a first plan for our emergency operations center should the city and the district choose to open the emergency operations center to coordinate city activities. With our partners, Marin County OES, and they have a representative here today. Tom, you want to raise your hand or just want to? Okay. But they held a roundtable down there for the Marin County agencies. And then we were able to come in and talk, and State Office of Emergency Services were there too and share what we're doing. We're also trying to get our public information officers together to work together because we're all talking about the same messaging, and it's really important to us that you hear consistent messaging and not conflicting messaging. So we're trying to make sure our public information is synced up. We are working with our local partners. Like I said, our most recent meeting was yesterday with the Water District, the Sanitary District, the School District, the Humane Society that's here in town. So that make sure we're all coordinated. Give me just a moment here.
There's a strike team in Novato. Now, granted, they go all over the world to solve immediate disasters, but why not look at them too? I'm sorry.
Yeah, bringing in federal resources is a little trickier, but we're aware that they're there.
Okay,
We're well aware that they're there.
I volunteer with Coast Guard Auxiliary, and we're first responders, and it's federal, but we partner with the community.
And you'd be amazed at the resources we can tap if we need to. A lot of great resources around here. And then lastly, a lot of this is going into what we're calling a playbook. That's the next step. And this is really going to be, when this happens, we're going to use the playbook to respond. So this playbook for us right now consists of 6 plays, basically 6 checklists, 6 job aids. And basically, when we get notified, we open it up to play 1 and start going through our checklist. This is who needs to be notified. These are the meetings that need to be scheduled, et cetera, et cetera. And I'll show you a couple of the plays here in a moment. Play 2 is right before the event starts. In play 2, we're going to be running around trying to assess and make sure that what we were told would be shut off is what's actually shut off, and we don't have it expanding. All the way through to play 5, and that's where at the end of play 5, the power's back on. But we're not done. Play 6 is where we get together and say, okay, here's what happened, what worked, what didn't work. Do we need to change the plan and make it make it better for next time? So this is where we're headed. This is now about a 70-page, 80-page document, and we're still fine-tuning it, but it really centers around just a small number of plays. So these are examples of the plays again, but again, checklist, job aids, so that in the moment, like we've suggested to you with a plan, that we're not going, now what do we do? And making sure there's things we don't miss. Making sure our staff's notified and updated. Making sure that our elected officials are told about this before the power goes out. But all these sorts of things we're working into this playbook. And then all these plans that I just mentioned and more are there to say, if in these meetings we say, okay, we have a safety security problem, let's go to the safety and security plan. If we need to do this, we need to do this. All this stuff has already been thought through, so we don't have to do it at the moment. And that's all fine and good. Write your plan. You can start simple. Sit down with your staff. Now, how many of you, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but how many of you either have employees or know of people who have employees who just love to poke holes in your ideas? How many of you are those people? Take advantage of them here. Have your plan, share it with your staff. They may know parts of your operation better than you. They may have some different perspectives. Encourage them to take a look and go, what if, but, and make adjustments to your plan based on that input. Walk through it again. If you can, test it. If there's things you can do, like I said, we disconnected the police department from the power grid and ran on generator for 24 hours to see what would happen. Try to test it. Don't assume, but walk through this and test it. Understand the relationships between your technologies. As I mentioned, if you're using generators, where are you getting fuel? If you're installing them, make sure you have an electrician involved. So if you can run this for a few hours, great. Oops, too far. Think about your partners and your vendors. If you have regular deliveries to your business, let's say it's frozen food, and you're in a power shutoff, do you still want that delivery coming this week? So maybe now's the time to talk to the vendor and say, look, if this happens, how are we going to handle this? Are there other businesses out there that you can cooperate with? One example from Sonoma County, I was talking to a couple of the kennel owners up there. And even though they're competitors, their plan for wildland fires, if one of them had a wildland fire near their kennel, they all agreed, load up all the dogs you got, bring them to your competitors' kennels, and they'll take care of them until the emergency's over. That's the kind of cooperation that really helps out in these things. So look for those opportunities with your neighbors as well. And work all that stuff into your plan. We mentioned before, these slide decks will be available to you by email. This is the information to sign up for Alert Marin. Encourage that. Again, this is not used for publicity. It's used to alert specific areas for some type of emergency. And you can leave it the way it is if you have a standard home phone and find out when you get home and check your answering machine what the problem was. Or we can have cell information, email information, and you can find out wherever you happen to be at the time before you come home. Nixel's here as well. Again, it's more of a public information things, but a lot of what we'll be putting out will be there as well. So encourage those signups.
Do we need to sign up for both, or is one?
They are different. They are different. So I would look at Nixel as being more of a public information piece, and you can select what level of messaging you want. If you get everything and you sign up for 10 or 12 departments, you get a lot of messaging sometimes, but you can try to limit that down. But for Alert Marin, if you get something from Alert Marin, I would take time to read that one, because somebody's made the decision to use this reverse 911 system to reach a particular neighborhood, and that'll be a little higher level messaging than anything else. So lastly, I wasn't looking for an acronym when we wrote this presentation, but we are hoping that you get amped up here and make sure you assess and mitigate and prepare for this thing. So we are using the sign-in sheets so that we can provide this slide deck to you later. And also, I think we want to talk a little bit about some possibilities for some other things that may help you out. And Katie, do you want to step up?
Yeah, so I'm Katie Chase. I'm a state farm insurance.
And if you want this on the recording, you need to be up here.
Like a good neighbor.
Friendly neighbor over there, David. So I've been getting a lot of questions from my customers, also local business owners about coverage through their insurance. So insurance is typically, I encourage you, just as a disclaimer, every policy is different. So you have to look at your own individual policy language. But in general, insurance, the purpose is to cover something that's sudden and accidental. This is not sudden, we're going to be warned, and it's not an accident, it's a purposeful act. So if you're relying on your insurance to cover some of that loss, think twice and really take a deep dive into that policy, because there could potentially not be coverage. So just keep that in mind when you're doing your preparedness planning. Thank you.
You have a question? Katie, you have a question?
Yeah, when you say loss, are you talking about loss due to power outage or loss due to fire?
Loss due to power outage. Food spoilage can also be a consideration for businesses as well. Typically, policies are a little bit more lenient in that area. However, then your deductibles coming into play. A lot of times, food spoilage, if that's the only loss, falls under your deductible.
Medical, like drugs and refrigerator loss.
what are that?
Yeah, so related to homeowners or business policy? A homeowner's policy. So again, yeah, it would be kind of taking a look at your specific policy language, talking to your insurance agent, and then referencing your deductible as well to see if that medication is over the deductible. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I've got a question.
This would be the time.
Okay. So, we're talking about Pacific Gas and Electric.
And this CPUC plan.
The gas part, not the
You're gonna have to
electric
repeat.
part.
Okay, so the question is, we're talking about PG&E, what about the gas part? So what we're understanding from PG&E, the gas system, they really run it as two separate enterprises. So the gas system is unaffected by this. Now, when it gets to your home, if you're using natural gas for something that requires electricity, like you have an electronic igniter for a stove, then that may be a challenge. But the gas part is separate from the electrical part. Okay? And I'm not giving any advice on how to manually turn anything on.
There's no threat to that, like backup generators when they keep pumping it or things like that.
Yeah, so the natural gas just flows through at pressure, and we're not hearing any concerns on the natural gas side, unless at the end of this, there's electricity involved in your device.
Okay.
But it'd be the electrical part that's the issue, not the natural gas. Ma'am?
I'm speaking on a different, the same subject, but a different item. I'm speaking for people with disabilities, physical disabilities. Now, you mentioned the Department of Human Resources. I don't know whether that would be of significant help. And the fact is that people with disabilities, some need require chair. They live in a two-level home and they need electricity, power. Some people need power in order to energize their vehicles so that they can access mobility. Have you addressed that?
Yes,
How do you want to go about doing that?
So with Health and Human Services, we're really going to be more involved with them in terms of facilities that are licensed in the community. For individuals, though, really our encouragement is for folks to talk with their doctors, to talk to their families, talk to their friends, and you develop your own plan. So when you get that warning, is staying at home the right choice, or do you go stay with family during that event? Because what we don't want is this. If you don't have a plan, what concerns us, and let me set this up, Captain Correa from the police department, how many patrol units do you have on right now typically?
About 5.
5. And Chief, apparatus?
I'm sorry.
Apparatus on duty?
So we operate out of 5 stations, so there's 5 fire engines, 5 fire.
I can read 5 fire engines. We got 5 officers.
Yeah, there are 5 fire stations that are strategically located. We have personnel that are there 24/7, 365 days a year that will respond. We've got fire engines with 3 people crew, and then also 3 ambulances that would respond, and they're always on duty.
So, but here's the challenge if you don't have a plan. We're looking at about 10 or 12 pieces of equipment able to respond. If 50,000 people have a plan that is 2 parts, pick up the phone, dial 911, if that's your plan, and 50,000 people are going to require on 12 units to run around and take care of everything, we're going to have a challenge. So we really encourage you, whether it's this event, earthquake, whatever, to have a plan and work with family, friends, medical providers, whatever that plan is, because the more resilient you are, the more comfortable and confident you're going to be in handling this, but it also minimizes the impact on your first responder resources so they can apply those where they're most critical. Ma'am.
What city buildings currently have generators, and how long are they going to run for?
For the city, the police department's on generator power. Like I said, we run it for 24 hours. The issue is getting fuel in after 4 or 5 days. The Corp Yard, the Margaret Todd Center, all 5 fire stations and fire administration are also covered by generators. The school district offices are also covered by generator. That's the latest.
Sanitary district.
And the sanitary district plant as well. But just the district offices, not the individual school sites, correct. Yeah.
Can we assume that all the hospitals in Marin, including the Novato community, are running on generators and will be full capacity
Yes. Ma'am.
Just a few questions. The cooling centers, are they well publicized as to where one can go? If that's go to those?
So we don't the issue is cooling sites, and are they advertised, where are they going to be? We don't pre-advertise them because depending on the situation, we may change a location. Now, so we've got a couple sites in mind, but once we decide to open them, then that's part of our public messaging. And in this case, we're not just talking just about cooling sites. Really, we're looking at it as a resource site for re-energizing things. So the cooling site idea has been around for a while, and we've done it occasionally. But the resource is the new piece. So normally we don't throw out a bunch of power strips and cords for people to come plug in. So that's the new piece this time. But we would announce those when they're open, where they're going to be and what hours they're going to be open. And we're looking at really daytime hours because, you know, this is different than an earthquake or a fire. Is that if you don't have power, you come down when it's hot, you know, come down to the resource site, recharge your stuff, but you can probably safely go home and sleep because we turn most of our stuff off at night anyway.
More of the long-term 24/48, and we have disabled, elderly.
So that would not be a resource site issue. Then we're talking about opening up shelters, and that's a bigger issue. With some work with the Red Cross, we'd probably be coordinating with the county. So the resource site is designed to be temporary to really help people get stuff plugged in, recharge, and connect. But if we get into 24-hour, 7-day, or multi-day sheltering, that's a different piece, and we would be announcing that as well.
Are we working on that to help our?
Well, we have the ability to do that. We're trying not to encourage people to rely on us for sheltering. We really want to encourage people to have their own plans. Typically, in most communities, even in disasters, it's a small percentage of folks that need sheltering. I mean, even with the North Bay fires, a lot of folks were driving out of the area to stay at hotels or family or friends. I had shelterees staying at my house during that event. But we're encouraging people to have your own plan and not rely on that because, again, with 50,000 folks, we can do some sheltering, but we're not sheltering 50,000 folks in town.
Okay, so my last question, and I'll turn it back over, is have you guys thought about like a volunteer committee? Because if we're all shut down in our businesses, I know there's plenty of us that would like to outreach to our community.
So Novato and the county has a plan through the Center for Volunteer and Nonprofit Leadership where we can activate them to establish an emergency volunteer center to register volunteers, and through them we could assign volunteers out to help in different things in the community. So we do have that in our plans right now. Ma'am.
Do we have, or are we looking at partnerships with other cities? Should a lot of the organizations within the buildings go down? There's a lot of remote workers in Novato. Where else could we go if there's not room at Margaret Todd or someplace else? Do we have partnerships?
So, yeah. Well, on the government side, for emergency management, there's already a structure how the cities and county interrelate to each other and help each other out. On the private sector side, really, we kind of look back to you to figure out, because everybody's business and operation is so unique. I don't know what advice to give you particularly, and also understand that while we are told there's a risk a large area may be impacted, hopefully we're talking about more surgical areas, and it may be as simple as several neighborhoods are blacked out, but other neighborhoods are fine, and maybe just be relocating in the same town, or going someplace. But until we see the map, so we're not sure exactly what's going to be impacted. But on the private sector side, really, that comes back to businesses to maybe start talking now to partners and through the chambers or whatever else to identify potential locations. But our emphasis right now is to make sure the first responders and the local government folks are ready to take care of the community.
I just have one other question. You said the transmission lines may be shut down. How do we know which transmission line is attached to? Because I know I've looked at those maps. I can't tell.
So what we're seeing from the initial times they're doing this is when they say we see this event coming, they're providing us data on what they expect will happen and when they expect to be able to turn it back on. Those are expectations, and it'll become clearer as we get closer. But we're not going to know until they tell us exactly what we're looking at, because the weather today and the weather tomorrow may be different enough that these two alerts may both affect Novato, but impact different neighborhoods based on the weather conditions. I had one over here.
Yeah, and just to begin, so I apologize if you addressed this. So
Sure. Is this definitely going to happen, or are there drills, et cetera? If you ask regionally, I don't think we have any doubt this is going to happen. It already happened in early June. Napa County and the foothills were impacted by one of these shutoffs. When or if it's going to occur in Novato, well, we have enough red flag warnings around here. We believe we're going to see it. But I can't tell you, if I could predict when the weather would be just like that, I would be in a different business making a lot of money. We can start over here, sir.
Yeah. Is there any, do you know of any state law that when everybody's power is out, that allows a moratorium on paying debts, your mortgage, how do you pay their bills with their parents?
And I'm one of them, so I'm not aware of anything that's been handled. Sure. The question is, if during a power outage, is there any law or mechanism dealing with paying bills? Because so many of us do it online, electronically. I'm not aware of anything for that at this point. Sir.
So I'm a solar and electrical contractor. Did I had to step out in this question, or?
Well, we walked through the mitigation, but what I might suggest, because we're not marketing anything, but if there are questions regarding solar, we have somebody here that can talk to you about that. It is one of the options that we talked about was solar, and the thing that came up was the difference between solar only, but solar feeding batteries that can provide power after the sun's gone down. Okay.
Has there any thought been given to identifying essential services like grocery stores, drug stores, and hardware stores, so that perhaps some of our merchants would be willing to volunteer to arrange for cash sales, and our people would know where to go if they were suddenly out of diapers, milk, hammers, hardware items, flashlights, face masks, and so on. I'm sure our Novato business community would volunteer to provide certain things.
So the question came up about critical services and critical suppliers for the community. Really, our outreach so far has been these types of presentations, asking them to be prepared and consider these alternatives like cash or hand swipe credit card receipts, et cetera. One of the challenges on this, if I knew for sure that if Novato was affected, it would be the entire town, our planning might take a little different bent. But the tier 2 and tier 3 areas you saw are most at risk, in which case downtown and some of these merchants might still be operating just fine. It's really for us is that transmission line twist. So we are encouraging all the businesses to think about how they would operate under these conditions, but we haven't done that specific outreach. Really, a lot of our focus, besides putting the message out like this, has been making sure we're ready for this as well, which has been its own effort. Let me get to this side of the room for a moment. I will come back. Sir.
What are they doing about, are they forcing PG&E to drop their lines now and put them underground? Is that the mitigating part of the judge's determination?
Sure, it had to do with creating mitigation by undergrounding some of these transmission lines. Just from media reports, there's a talk about that. It's hugely expensive and time consuming, so we won't see it this summer. But that is an effort that's out there being talked about, but that'll be probably something that has to come out of the state to force that issue. And like I said, it won't be a quick solution. But this year, I think we are where we are. Ma'am.
I'm with Bucksall Service down on Grant, and I'm not trying to sell, but we do have Honda generators, and I'm willing to stay afterwards with questions if people have questions about like size-wise.
Okay.
My husband's the pro at it, he's working, I'm here, but I can
So
if they want to meet with
So for the recording, Bucksaw is here, and if you want to talk to them afterwards, feel free. Let me go all the way back.
A lot of our schools now have solar panel arrays. Is there any plan to put battery storage at those facilities so they become emergency sites?
Had to do with the school district with their solar arrays and whether they have battery backup. I'm not aware of that at this point, but I would really have to refer that question to the school district. When we met with them, they did talk about the generator support for their admin building, but that was as far as it got. They are concerned too, and like I said, they were planning with us as well.
I'd like to get back to the latest question about disabled people. I know the fire safe communities, part of that is knowing your neighbors and having a communication plan and things of that nature. Is there a possibility of a big push on getting more fire safe communities so we've got those little
That's your question.
networks?
Yeah, thank you, David. So what he's talking about is there's a program called Fire Safe that neighborhoods can go through, and a part of that is improving knowing each other's neighbors, neighbor helping neighbor, that sort of concept. And so to the extent that you'd like to, whatever neighborhood you live in, consider something like that, please see me afterwards. I'll give you my card and we can talk more about that. But with regards to people with disabilities and other access functional needs, because I want to also mention, you know, the best thing that you can do is to come up with your own plan and to not rely on calling 911 to help you out in a jam. Because as Dave mentioned earlier, the resources will be overwhelmed by the amount of requests that are coming in, and then those things will just be prioritized. What PG&E has done is that you should have all received a letter at home that asks you to self-identify as a person with disabilities, or if you've got medical equipment that needs power. There was a form that they included in that letter that you would fill out that says what you need it for, and then you were supposed to take that to your doctor. Your doctor would sign off verifying that you actually do. You put in your contact information, and PG&E was saying that they would make an extra effort to make sure that you receive notifications when the power was going to go off as far in advance as possible so that you could implement your own plan. And so that, again, that falls on what resources do you have, what other family members, if you don't have family members, what other community members, what other groups do you have, how well do you know your neighbors, you know, and get tied in and get connected. There's a lot of community benefit to being able to do that. So think about how you're going to implement your own plan and realize that you know, you may be on your own for quite a while. So the opportunity to think about this should be long-term for you all too. This isn't just something that's happening this summer and then that's the last time we have to worry about it. So the city governments are looking at this in terms of long-term, long-range planning. So the question about whether the school district will end up batteries with solar, they will eventually. We're all going to have to change the way that we are prepared to be able to deal with this thing, because I don't think it's going away. I think it's going to expand. And so at the fire district, just as one small example, when we did our evaluations of all of our generators, we discovered that some of our generators are really old. And we have concerns, you know, not only just because now there's better generators that are more efficient, better for the environment, et cetera, but, you know, will the transfer switch fail, you know, when it goes on after it's been running for several days, you know? And so we've put into our budget this year about a $250,000 to do a long-term plan to replace 3 of the 6 generators that we have. So I would suggest as businesses and then as homeowners, you have the same sort of thought, that long-term planning about what you want to do. In terms of the solar, you know, it's not just a solar system. You've got to have some sort of a battery, you know, stationary batteries that it feeds so that you can operate off of that power when the sun goes down. There's also systems out there that integrate electric cars into a solar that also helps run your home. So I think you're going to see more of these things over time and different options, you know, that are going to become available. I just think it's something that we're going to need to have better planning and learn to live with. Yes?
I believe earlier you might have made the statement, I'm not sure, that in San Diego when they closed down the system, then they ran a check and they found 5 areas where it had to be repaired to protect, you know.
So that was me. That was the shut off in early June up in Butte County.
Okay, so my question is PG&E right now, especially in areas 3, doing constant daily checking of the dangerous areas to fix these things so this doesn't have to be a problem propelled into the future? I mean, if they know area 3 is a part that they're mostly worried about, and they can find generators or whatever it is that they need to fix, are they doing that on a daily basis with teams trying to find these issues?
My understanding is they're aggressively trying to deal with both their vegetation reduction, so they're increasing the distances that they're clearing trees off of lines, because that's part of that problem, and that they have you know, aggressively looking at what their infrastructure and upgrades are. I think there was an article in the IJ recently that there was a report back that along the main transmission lines through Marin County that there's a number of main towers that they now intend to replace because of this assessment that they've done.
To just clarify too, when I mentioned the 5 areas, it appears from the report that these were 5 areas that were damaged as a result of the weather event, not due to negligence or maintenance, but these were the places like the wind caused a branch to come down and hit lines. So these ones are right on point with the value of de-energizing parts of the system. So it wasn't, these 5 were not about negligence or maintenance. Tom?
Thank you. Yeah, for those of you that are putting together a personal plan for yourself, if you might have a medical vulnerability or if you have somebody in your life that's medically fragile, as you're putting together that plan, it is great to have it individualized. There are some terrific building blocks available at the Marin County Health and Human Services website. I would encourage you that are doing that activity to Google Marin County Health and Human Services. And it's very easy to access. It's the web page that they put up specifically for the purpose of preparing for de-energization.
Right, so just so we have it on tape here too. So Health and Human Services here in Marin, if you Google that, they have resources to help you build your plan. So we do highly encourage that. Yeah.
I'm so glad to hear that there'll be resource centers open to the public. I think you'll find a lot of public members in the community will want to utilize those for different reasons. I want to circle back to the question about remote workers. There are a lot of remote workers in Novato that are distance from the city in Silicon Valley. Will there be Wi-Fi available at any of these resource centers if people need to check in with work? Repeat the question.
Sure, the question was Wi-Fi access of these resource centers. Depending on the site, so we were kind of doing what's called continuity operations planning yesterday. If the site has internet and has Wi-Fi that's publicly accessible and that stays up, then the answer would be yes. But in some of our sites, it appears that the internet may be its own issue. And so then the issue for us in some of these facilities is there a value of simply being able to plug in, and there's a value there, especially if you have little ones that like their electronic toys. But I can't tell you right now that Wi-Fi would be available, nor if 40 people show up with laptops, would the Wi-Fi connection allow it. You could overwhelm that.
Communicate about when you get the word out about the resource centers, because you will have a lot of people who are roaming around with laptops trying to find a place to work.
Yeah, I would say if you're working from home, and I do that as well, and I'm struggling with this myself for my home office as to how far I want to go. But if you're looking at this from a professional standpoint, I might be looking at other alternatives in the resource sites, because you could have a lot of people coming down there to plug in, and it may be a challenge. But a couple simple things I'm looking at doing, because they really don't cost me a dime, is if I hear that my neighborhood may even be affected, I'm topping off the tanks to my vehicles. Doesn't cost me a dime. I'm going to burn through the gas eventually anyway. But at least when it starts, I don't have to worry about what gas stations are open. Same thing with the ATM. I'm going to go make sure I've got some cash in my pocket for a while. Again, doesn't cost me a dime, because eventually I'm going to go through that. So not everything involves a $250,000 study for generators. There's some very simple things you can do to make sure you're prepared going in.
Hold on. I just want to piggyback on that. The things you can do once you think there's notifications. Some of the messaging that we heard from both the sanitary district and the water district that they're going to be pushing out is, water conservation efforts to try and really ramp that up, because the amount of water that they have in their tanks can be used either quickly or slowly. And so we're going to be asking you all to just kind of use austere measures when it comes to water and flushing and all those sorts of things, so it extends the amount of water that's in those tanks that help serve those systems. So those are other sorts of things that you can begin to think about ahead of time. Like, there should really be no landscape watering at all, going on during this time period. You might not want to be flushing the toilets as often, take less showers or faster showers, that sort of thing. So instead of running through a water tank supply, and there are different zones, not every area is exactly the same. Rather than running through a tank in one day and then having to try and pump to fill that back up, maybe it can go for 3 days, and that'll help us out quite a bit.
And those kind of messages will be part of our public messaging. Again, that's why we're partnering with the water district, sanitary district, schools, et cetera, to make sure we have some common messaging for you. Let me start. Ma'am.
Are you going to have another one of these meetings for people that can't come during the day?
Sure. This is the second one we've done in Novato, but we are talking about maybe doing this in the evenings and more focused on residential. Really, it's essentially the same presentation, but if I'm only talking to homeowners, I really don't have to talk about point of sale devices, but it's pretty much the same. So we have talked about doing that. Probably be at least a couple of weeks, but we'll get that word out as well. Ma'am?
Back to the resource center question, like not the Wi-Fi, but there are a ton of remote workers, there are a ton of people who have phones that are necessary. I'm not even thinking about kids' phones, but things that are important. And resource centers are going to be flooded. So really, are you planning on enough power and enough strips?
So, yeah, so the sites that we would use are ones that are electrically supported, either by regular power sources because they're an area that's not affected, or they have generator support. So, you know, we're really looking at this. Our main concern is folks that have medical equipment that has to be recharged. That's really, to me, more important than the business side. And like I said, I run a home business myself. But really about that recharging and plugging in piece. The Wi-Fi piece, really for businesses, you should be taking this time to look at some alternatives as part of your plan. But even if we had Wi-Fi, you know, I said we could easily I mean, imagine for your home Wi-Fi, if 50 people showed up trying to connect, you're going to jam that signal up in no time. So, you know, it may be that that becomes what you choose to do, but we really want to encourage people now to think through where they might be able to relocate to or operate out of. We just don't know what that day is going to look like. If the cell sites stay up, great, everybody's got access to cellular data. If cell sites go down, that's another data source that goes away. You know what? So we're going to be walking through this the first time together, and it really is going to depend on the scope of this thing. So the June PSPS events gave us an inkling about what this will look like. It really wasn't a severe red flag warning day, but it was a red flag warning day. There was a fire during that time over in Yolo County. I have not heard one word that it was connected to PG&E, but it was red flag warning, and we did have a fire. But we'll probably see more severe red flag warnings later in the summer with more extreme heat and winds and things like that, and we're going to have to see what happens. I'll come back over here. Yeah?
It occurs to me as I sit here and listen to this, and there was a question about how do we handle our families in our homes if we have no power, and food was an issue, I believe, that you mentioned. If anybody, if you're familiar with river rafting or really professional camping, there are ways to manage food, like I'm thinking of packing freezers. There's a specific way to pack your portable freezer, take frozen food from your refrigerator into your ice chest. There's a specific way of packing that so that you can last and survive for days in the wilderness. And there are commercial outfitters that have that on their websites. You know, surviving, we all go out and live without power.
We do.
We don't have to work too, but this is a resource.
So the issue here was, you know, for refrigerated and frozen food, there are ways to use ice chests and other things to try to keep that cold. And simply with your refrigerator and freezer, if you can keep the door closed, you'll keep the cold in for a lot longer time. I'm going to test this theory next week. I'm headed for the Sierras on Monday, and we'll see how this works.
I've lost stuff in my freezer before on a 3-day power outage.
You
But
can.
this is packing specifically to utilize already the frozen food in your freezer, which you would remove, and how it's layered and managed.
So that's probably something people could Google if they wanted to see that. Sir.
These PUC maps that you showed us initially about the zones, are they going to be updated by zone? Like, okay, this is a zone that's here before we get our warning. Will it be in red and flat?
No, I don't believe so. What we're hearing is if they reach out to us and say, we think Novato is going to be impacted by one of these, then they're going to put the maps for that event on a portal that we'll have access to see them. Now, in the June event, that happened so early that they hadn't worked all the bugs out of that yet, and that's one of the things that came out of that. But they're going to be having incident-specific maps available to public safety, and I think they're going to make them public as well.
Here's my question, really.
But it won't be on that map.
So there's no way, if we're out of power, there's no way for people out of the area to see that our area is out.
Well, I would say if it's anywhere around here at all, the media will take care of that for us. Because these will be stories, without a doubt.
No, I didn't mean, it would have been nice
But-
if those maps.
Sorry. So PG&E does have an outage map, you know, that you can normally check when power goes out, and they if an outage is there, they have been reporting it on that specific map. So as long as you can get to the internet, you should be able to see the area remotely.
Has this sort of power shutoff for public safety, which to me is an oxymoron, occurred in other states, or is it endemic just to California?
My understanding is that Southern California is where this was first implemented successfully.
Because I'll just be honest with you, I have a business, Creekside Bakery, so we deal with perishable goods, and all the suggestions of keeping the refrigerator closed, the freezers closed, they just won't work. I mean, they just will not work. The credit card strips, they don't make them with imprints anymore. And there's all these things where my backup plan is you get a dumpster and you throw away a week's
Yeah.
food.
Right.
And then the further part of that is you have employees that have no money because they haven't worked for them.
Right.
There's no sales tax. I mean, it's just, I'm waiting to see it happen so we can see what the effects are. But I mean, what it leaves a business owner like myself to do is seriously considers our state that treats me better. Period.
Okay.
I mean, I hate to say that. You guys are doing a great job, by the way. You get paid. When this happens, a lot of us don't.
Right.
We lose our entire income. And the way that we make our living, the way that we help and support this town and give back to it. So,
Right. So that's why I think, you need to think long-term also. There's getting through the first, what can you do in the short term, and then there's a long-term planning. So when I think about that, I think about what conversations can you have with the building owner about installing these sorts of systems that can help, build in resiliency so that you don't have that happen.
I'm looking to do that myself. So
Okay.
the last question I have, if it's long-term, we're told all the time about the effects of global warming and long-range forecasting, yet I'm being told that you can't forecast these. So is there a historical basis over the last 5 years or 10 years of how many times these red flag warnings have come up, so we can, I as a business owner, if I'm going to invest $10,000, $20,000 in a generator system, do I know how many times I'm going to be shut down?
So there is in the National Weather Service has great archives. Okay. So you could go through there and do some of your research. I've called around to the National Weather Service stations asking if they've specifically identified the number of times that a red flag condition has occurred, and they don't track it that way. So that analysis still needs to be done, but I can tell you just in general, it happens about half a dozen times at least in Novato.
Okay.
But that is a red flag condition. That doesn't mean it doesn't mean that we're going to have the shut off in those tiered areas. And some red flag conditions are at different elevations as well. So we might get a red flag elevation of 1,000 feet. That doesn't necessarily affect us down here, so that may not trigger the shutoff. Remember, there's that other criteria that they're going to use. So I don't want everyone to think that all red flags mean automatically we're not going to have power. We're going to need to rely on the notifications that PG&E are making ahead of time. And just so you know, the way that happens is PG&E will make a decision. They will send that to the California Office of Emergency Services. They have a warning center. They send the information to the warning center. It's immediately the maps, locations are released. It gets pushed down through our local regional area emergency operations center, which is the County of Marin, which is a hot EOC. They receive the information and immediately push that out to all of the emergency responders, so that we have conference calls that start up, and we start looking at those areas, and we identify where we're going to have these resource centers, and the messaging goes out, and we prepare. That's the way that's going to go. They're saying that we're going to get 48, 24-hour notice. That did not happen up in Butte County, YOLO, just recently. They had less than 24 hours notice. So we're hoping people can make those plans so that they can be ready to react.
Are you aware of the smart meter fires?
Yeah, it's a different topic.
Yeah, but it's PG&E, and they're going to shut the electricity on, but they're going to leave the gas, so we can still have fires. I mean, we're trusting PG&E on this 1-2 thing, where in the past all they've done is started fires. So
yeah. I don't agree with you.
Yeah, I think that's a different conversation.
Yeah, in the back.
No, it isn't. It's gas and electricity.
No, but in terms of what we're trying to do today.
The notification portion is on battery backup, but it only lasts a short period of time. Is there restrictions for having people in the building once the notification portion of your fire alarm goes down? Or as long as the sprinkler side of the system is still operational, are people allowed to be in the building?
Yes.
Can you repeat?
The question is, if you lose power and it affects your fire alarm, for example, the power has a 24-hour battery backup, but you could exceed that. What happens? Will building officials and fire officials close a building down because the alarm systems are not functioning? So in that regard, what we're saying is I don't believe so. The sprinkler systems that are tied to those alarm systems, the sprinklers will operate without power.
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, the prudent thing to do, and what we'd probably advise, is that you identify a fire watch, a person that would be responsible for making sure that you don't have a small fire, that can notify occupants of the buildings ahead of time.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
If I may too, getting into a couple things that were said, what we're seeing from the June event is PG&E was required to file a report with the CPUC after they did that deactivation or de-energization. For those two relatively surgical areas, that report was nearly 60 pages long, and they explain all the weather conditions they were looking at from all the different sources, why they picked those areas, what the impact was of those areas, and the recovery part about what they found during the re-energization inspections, the 5 areas they located that appeared to be damaged during the weather. But while the National Weather Service issues red flags, and that's one factor, the decision about what to de-energize rests with PG&E in this area. So we're responding to what they've decided to do, which is why I opened up the presentation by being clear I don't work for them and I'm not representing them. But we're doing our best to cope with the situation we have and share that with you. The other thing I want to mention before I forget, as you notice there's a couple cameras here. This will be posted up on Novato Community Television if there's other folks that would like to see the presentation, in addition to the ability for us to do this presentation again in the future. All right, sir?
On the water, just something that maybe you have checked on. Most of our water comes from Lake Sonoma. So you have about a 50-mile pump and pipe system that doesn't work. So if power goes out in Healdsburg, we could have more water too.
So what we've been told by the Water District is the Sonoma County Water Agency has generator-supported pumping up there, so they're comfortable with the water that comes down from Sonoma County, and then they're working on their own plan about how to get water up to the tanks around here to keep the gravity-fed part of the system in place. But that's part of the planning we've been doing with them because we saw that issue, we saw the sanitation issue, and so we're working with them as partners. If we do get into one of these events, part of what you saw in those checklists is not only will we have an internal city district meeting, but each of those will be followed up by a local partners conference call so that all those agencies can coordinate what they're seeing, what we can do with each other to help out. But that is part of our planning. Sir.
Yeah, I just want to say, being in the electrical industry, I know everybody loves to hate PG&E, but if the last couple of years didn't teach us anything, I don't know what would. I personally, I'd prefer to have my power shut down and have Marin burn to the ground. Hundreds of people die, thousands of homes are gone. It means a little inconvenience for us. I think that's the right answer.
Yeah, and I mentioned that earlier. They're really between a rock and a hard place. They've told me in conversation they have one goal for the summer, and that's not to be blamed for any of the fires. That's their goal, which also means that if they have a choice between shutting down a neighborhood or taking a gamble on that starting a fire, they'll probably be fairly assertive and aggressive about that to make sure they're not blamed for any more fires. But that's really a key goal for them after the last couple of years. And you're right, we've seen, and again, not that every fire was caused by PG&E equipment, but they're very cognizant of that, and especially after the campfire last year, very cognizant of that. And that's, again, do they keep the power on and risk more fires, or do they turn it off and risk the implications we're all talking about today? And there isn't one single great silver bullet to deal with this. Ma'am.
So, medical needs, we have electric stair lifts, and, we can talk to our neighbors, but if this is gonna happen in a couple of days, that's not really gonna work. So, you're talking about the resource centers, is it even being thought of to have some kind of portable generators that people can check out, like from the library, for example, bring it home, charge the stair lift, keep it going a couple more days, and then go back, someone else can use it.
Really, what we're encouraging is if that's your situation, that for you to develop a plan to be resilient, and there are places around that rent and sell generators. If someone's that reliant, whether it be an earthquake or this event, you probably should be thinking of some kind of backup power supply anyway. But we're really encouraging people to be self-resilient here and self-prepared because no matter how resilient the community is, we're going to be busy those days. Ma'am.
I'm just concerned about people aren't having power and alternate sources of, say, for cooking. People are going to rely on barbecue. They're going to rely on propane. Themselves, sources of fire. Is there some kind of going to be community public awareness speeches or notifications to encourage people to use these items safely, and or what about, is it called, we have air alerts? We're not allowed to use, it's a no burn day. What then does the public do?
Maybe you can on the no burn days. That's familiar with it. Can they barbecue on a no burn day?
Yeah, you can barbecue on a no burn day. Mostly the no burns have to do with pile burning, and there are areas of open space that will close during certain conditions, and they don't want campfires or people out there smoking, that kind of thing. But yeah, part of our campaign and information is going to be about making sure that you're careful about ignition sources and not causing fires. I mean, we don't want you to use a barbecue inside a house, for example, because that creates carbon monoxide, and it's a different problem.
All right. If there are any, so we've got a couple of folks here that are available to ask questions, and we'll be around for a while, but I think we're getting close to wrapping this up. But, sir?
Your maps that you put up there, you have 3 tiers. I had a long conversation with PG&E yesterday, and they indicated to me there are many zones within each one of those maps.
Absolutely.
Is that information available so someone can look at their location and see where in the city is it on and where?
So they have, I think you're talking probably about circuit maps that lay out the very different pieces.
They don't shut the power off in the whole zone.
No, and they're not. They're going to figure out which circuits they need to shut off, and again that gets to the specific weather. So the challenge with even knowing what those circuit maps are, and I don't think those are publicly available, but it doesn't tell you which ones they're going to turn off next week or the week after. They're being very clear about where those weather conditions. So it may be one way on one side of a hill and different on the other side of the hill. And so once they know what area has crossed their criteria, then they'll be looking in their maps as to which circuits that's going to affect. And that's the information that we're looking for. But because it's so weather dependent, they really can't give us more than a couple days notice. And again, the 48-hour notice may say, we're looking at this area, and by 24 hours it may be this area, or maybe it got bigger because the weather changed. So that map of what they've decided to do is much more important to the planning than just circuit maps, because the circuit you're in may never be touched, or it may be touched every time. We're just not going to know until the weather event creates the notifications.
Last question I have, just as relative, I looked into generator systems for residential use. Keep in mind that permanently installed generators typically run off of natural gas, so they'll run when the power goes out. But portable generators, they run off of gasoline. Typically have small tanks. They burn about 3/4 of a gallon per hour. So someone using that for 2 or 3 or 4 days at a time is going to be continually refilling full of fuel. If you're not, adept at doing that, you can not only start a fire, have an explosion, burn your whole house down just because you're operating your own generator.
And there are also some dual fuel generators that can run on either, depending on what you have available to you. But those are things you should be discussing with somebody that can look at the load you need and deal with wiring it into your business or your home. All right, again, this will be on Novato Community Television after I get a chance to clean it up a little bit. Thank you all for being here, and I hope this was helpful to you.